my biggest concern was what you guys would think about it's luck message. I don't like the way that came across.
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel like there's no way for them to be successful other than luck. And so when I watched that back, I was like, oh, why did I have to say it that way? Because it's not what I meant. It's what I meant is there are a lot of factors that we can't control. And so we need to do everything that we can from a design standpoint and, getting curiosity. We need to do all of that so that we'll just have our best chance. I just think that I emphasized the wrong part.
I think that's a huge reason that some videos end up taking so much longer than they need to, probably for anybody's channel, is that perfectionism or those worries creep in.
We try and cover our bases. We're like, well, what if someone thinks this and what if someone thinks that? And so we end up like giving all these caveats and
just muddies it.
It just kind of muddies the message. At the end of the day, like some of the concerns that we had with this video, we published it, and those weren't even the things people brought up. They still brought stuff up, but people are always going to bring stuff up.
Yeah.
And we can never really accurately guess what people's criticisms will be of our video. So we might as well just publish it, speak to the audience we want to speak to, and then anyone with concerns, they can voice them and then we can address them.
Welcome back to Creative Files Podcast. I'm Julia. Talking to Nathan today because he has just made a video in 8 hours. So that was for our Channel Makers YouTube education channel. And we normally both work on that channel and we both plan the videos, usually mostly together. Sometimes one person will kind of be the primary. But for the most part, usually we spend most of the creation time together, planning, filming together, and then we have editors that edit the videos. For this one, for the challenge, Nathan did everything all by himself. Just tell us a bit about like all the steps that took.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everything you imagine. I would try to stick as fairly close to our typical processes as that we normally do. So that was obviously ideation to start, figuring out what topic I wanted to do the video on. And then from there, figuring out, how I want to package it. So not only from a presentation standpoint, but also from a thumbnail standpoint and a title. Typically try and do those earlier on in the process so that we can figure out what the best marketing for the video will be. So anyway, I did some of that, going right into researching and planning out the video, and then some scripting, straight into filming, straight into editing, and then tweaking the thumbnail a little bit. And yeah, and it's kind of funny because some people might listen to this and go, well, 8 hours is a long time. Yes, it is a long time, but compared to what we typically do, it is an incredibly short amount of time. And part of the fun part of the challenge is that, like you said, I'm not typically doing all of these steps of the process. So like the thumbnail design, I typically help brainstorm the thumbnail design, but I definitely not going in there and making it myself.
Right.
And the same for the editing of the video. So there was a little bit of an extra element to the challenge there where, typically we have these split responsibilities across multiple team members, and I decided to take a shot at doing it myself. So that was kind of I think probably the most challenging part.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun.
Things you're not used to doing. Yeah, for context, we kind of combined ideation and research, but we probably spend at least maybe 5 to even 15 hours on that combined. Yeah. And then thumbnail, probably anywhere from maybe 1 to 2 hours just on the planning side. And then Cody puts it together, and then we review it, and then we tweak it.
Yeah.
Filming is probably the shortest part, but we spend some time with the outline or script or however we're going to do that. And then editing, I think Cody often spends 20 hours on an edit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for the current standard for the channel, and that's what's important here, because what we wanted to test was, could we, at least one time, could we get away with an 8-hour video when we normally are spending over 40 combined easily? And would it perform as well or close to as well as the other things on the channel? So that was kind of what the channel or the challenge was about. And that's why 8 is very, very little, because we were trying to rank with all these other videos that we spend so much more time on with way less time. Yeah. And like you said, you were in charge of all these responsibilities that you are normally primarily not responsible for,
Right.
especially editing and thumbnail design.
Yeah. And you gave a couple parameters for the
Yes.
video, which just added a little extra element of difficulty, which was the video had to be at least 7 minutes long, which it's just easier to create a shorter video. Like, just imagine the editing time that you could take off if it was a 4-minute video, the planning, the scripting. So at least 7 minutes. And then what was average percentage viewed? Is that correct? Of
Yes.
37, 35?
37.5.
Okay, 37.5%. So also, so a little bit of a performance challenge, but then also just the duration of the video had to be at least 7 minutes. So
And part of why I had the duration parameter in there was because if you had a 2-minute video, then you're going to get the
Right.
watch percentage. So
Right.
trying to make it
No
reasonable.
cheating.
Yes,
Right.
no cheating.
Yeah, and I think, a 7-minute video, that's about on par for what our channel is. Probably in the 7 to 10 minute range, sometimes a little longer, occasionally a little shorter. But I think it was really important going into the challenge that this video didn't stand out as a video that just looked and felt totally different.
Yeah.
Of course, my editing was going to be a little bit different, but spoiler alert, we published a video and we didn't get a lot of feedback like that, being like, oh, this doesn't feel like
Strong
it fits
here,
the channel. Yeah. So anyway, it was important to me that it didn't feel like, oh, here's a 2-minute video and it's going to be way different than what we normally do. I really wanted to try and get it as close as I could to match the feeling of the channel so that it would perform essentially like any other video would.
Right. And that was really the point. And we had a hard time deciding, actually, if we were going to for sure publish it if it didn't feel like it was working out.
Yeah.
Because, we don't want to compromise the standard of the channel. And we didn't want it to look out of place. But it also felt like if we didn't kind of promise ourselves that we would publish, then, the pressure wouldn't be there.
Yep.
You wouldn't be able to, just naturally, nobody would take it quite as seriously as this has to come together no matter what. And I think that pressure is a lot of what made this video do as well as it did. So when you were picking your idea, I did check-ins every once in a while for more context. We're making 2 videos actually out of it. I'm making another video about how this whole 8-hour challenge went. So I was checking in with you every 30 minutes. And quite early on, you decided to do a video with a lot of research. You said, oh yeah, I'm going to review over 200 thumbnails.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting because you're already short on time and that sounds like a lot of research. What was your thinking behind that?
Well, to hit some of the goals that we wanted to hit for this video, length, I needed a good amount of material to talk about. Because it's easy when you're doing a video by yourself or you're used to doing a video with another person, it's easy to end up with a shorter video.
Yeah.
Because there's not discussion happening. It's very much more just totally reliant on you. So I knew that I needed a lot of material to work with. And so I guess part of the idea was if I'm looking at 200 thumbnails or however many it was, I would have a lot of things to talk about. I would have potentially 200 things to talk about. And so I could probably pretty easily hit this 7-minute mark. The other part of it was that I knew that I needed to do something, I almost said extraordinary. Not that looking at 200 thumbnails is extraordinary, but just something that would catch people's attention.
Yeah.
For the purpose of the branding. And as I had kind of worked my title and thumbnail, I knew that I needed some number. I knew research would look good. That would kind of play into the branding and the marketing of the video. So if I just did a video, what thumbnails do best on YouTube, okay, that's maybe a good video, but there's no draw, but if it's, I looked at 250 thumbnails, 250 of the best thumbnails on YouTube, here's what I found, that's just a little bit more interesting. So I wanted to do that. I also didn't want to just pick a video idea that would be easy. Like you said, I think the pressure helps a little bit. I had some other video ideas that definitely would have been easier to execute, and probably could have made for a 15 or 20 minute video. But I just didn't feel like that would be really pushing my boundaries. And I figured for the sake of the challenge, why not make it a little bit harder? Which I don't know if that was the smartest thing to do, but it ended up working out.
Yeah. I think the results kind of show for themselves. And there's a lesson to be learned there.
Yeah.
That sometimes if you're not shying away from the hard things, the video can in a lot of ways be easier. Because this video ranked most of the day yesterday, the first 24 hours. I believe it was around 2 out of 10. Is that right?
Yep.
So it did great. And if you had chosen something else, you probably would have had a harder time coming up with a compelling title and thumbnail. You would have had to put more work into it, and it still might not have been as compelling.
Yeah.
You might not have gotten as many clicks anyways, even if you had put a lot more work into the title and thumbnail, because the idea itself wouldn't have been as intriguing.
Right.
Watch time could have suffered because, right away with this video, you led with something really interesting. So in a way, not shying away from the hard thing, I think made a lot of the other steps easier. Although, of course, the research time was going to be longer.
Yeah.
I think that's a common mistake, especially when videos feel last minute. I know for myself on my own channel, when I'm like, I just got to get a video out because I told myself I'd publish, and I haven't been doing much. So I just got to get something out. And then I'm like sifting through for the easiest thing.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily going to end up being the easiest, which is kind of counterintuitive. Okay. So I'm going to give my thoughts on the video and a little bit of critique.
Yeah.
But first, is there anything else about the challenge that you found really interesting or you want to share?
I mean, I have some overall thoughts, and I think we might have talked about it on another podcast. So maybe I'll save some of those for closer to the end. But I just would say that I really agree with you that going the slightly more interesting or engaging or more difficult route, I think you're right. I really think that made a big difference. I have I can edit a video just fine. I can do some, I'd say, average editing, but I'm not a whiz on the editing software like Cody is, And so I definitely needed the topic to really hold up the video,
Yeah.
And the same for the branding. Like, I'm not great in Photoshop. I ended up realizing during the challenge I didn't even have Photoshop on my computer at the time. And so I ended up having to use the free version of Canva, which also comes with severe limitations. And so, again, if the idea wasn't very good and my tool set wasn't very good, it would have ended in a terrible situation.
Something has to be great.
Something has to be better to kind of pull it up. And I think the video idea, while not the best, probably most amazing video idea, it was good enough. As we found out, like you said, I think it performed 2 out of 10 most of the day. It started, interestingly enough, out at a 5, and then it climbed up to a 2, and I think it's sitting at a 3 right now.
Yeah.
But it's hovering around. It's doing well. It hit some of those markers we were hoping to see. I did get it. I think it's a 7.5-minute video, so just right above that 7-minute mark. I'm interested to hear your critique, and I'm glad to hear the critique. I think that there's a lot of positive that went into the challenge, but that definitely does not make it a perfect video. I have my own critique, so I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah.
So that we can kind of talk through, like, what did the time crunch force me to do that could have been done better if we had more time or more resources. So I think there's a good conversation there.
So recently, we actually did another video on channel makers, and we had kind of people rank themselves on different metrics, and we ranked them on different metrics, like pre-production, quality, editing, on-camera presence, all these things. And I thought for fun, I would just kind of like run your video through that test. And I ended up giving you about a 3 or a 4 out of 5 on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even a 4 out of 5 on most of them, except the editing, I would say was definitely the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
And the video performed 2 out of 10. So the first instinct, maybe, especially if somebody else is trying this challenge and that happens to them, might be, okay, well, if you edited this video, we know the editing is not as good as our editors usually do.
Right.
Then does it matter? Does the editing even matter if it performs as good? But I think it performed in spite of the editing. Not that the editing doesn't matter. I think the idea was really good.
Mm-hmm.
You like hit the mark on a lot of other things, like you were saying. Other things had to be extra good.
Right.
So it's dangerous with any video if you make a big change or even a small change and then put too much weight to that change, because there's so many factors. You can't just say, oh, the editing doesn't matter because this one did good and it didn't have as much editing as I usually do. That is like really, really dangerous. I think that's how a lot of channels end up going downhill, is because they see something that kind of works and they keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And another thing is, I think every once in a while we can get away with like a video with a style that's more like this or less edited, but that doesn't mean that we can do it all the time.
It doesn't mean it's the best way.
Yeah.
It just means that it worked.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean it was the right way to do it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, the intro, I really love the intro. I think your energy is very high on the intro. You make it feel interesting, and then you go right into like this little montage of the research. So you're taking them on the story from the very beginning instead of just, you could have definitely waited until you'd done the research and then filmed afterwards. It's all the same day, but you decided to kind of film first and then do the research. And I like the feel of that. It's very, I think you kind of built up the energy really well. So then you start talking about what you found. And I think that this is probably the biggest thing that, my biggest critique of this video is that you talk about how there are, this many light thumbnails and this many dark thumbnails and this many. And to me, I can tell you were going through the homepage, and even if people realize that, I think something maybe kind of critical to mention is that those are good thumbnails. Just kind of like, can't really argue for the most part that if a video is on the homepage, it's going to have high views. And you did show the videos and they had very high views. It's kind of obvious as well. But I think a good point would have been that with thumbnails that don't perform well, you almost never see them.
Right.
And you have to go looking for channels with low performing videos because YouTube doesn't suggest them. And I'm not sure if our audience really realizes that you were kind of naturally sifting through all of the best thumbnails by doing it with the homepage. Every once in a while, you'll get recommended one, right? That's really small, but usually only if you're subscribed to the channel or maybe YouTube's testing.
Right.
But it's pretty rare. So I think pointing that out a little bit more, maybe even saying your view criteria of like, I'm not counting it if it's under this many views, or maybe if you had a batch that were really low views. So you could say, hey, look, these ones are really low views, look like this. Now, at the end of the video, that wasn't really your point.
Right.
But I'm not sure that was clear either, because then you do mention that the main point is curiosity, which I think is a great takeaway. And it kind of kept them hanging on, like, because those are other questions. If hypothetically you had just said the most important thing is curiosity, well, then people are wondering, what about all these other things I've heard that matter? I've always wondered about light versus dark thumbnails and things like that. But you kind of go through each of these things and then you do say curiosity is the most important thing.
Right.
I think what was missing is any thumbnail could work. There's very successful light thumbnails. There's very successful dark thumbnails, probably because more thumbnails on the homepage, more of these big top performing thumbnails are light. That probably means brighter thumbnails usually do better, but not always.
Yeah.
And that's not really what you should be basing all your choices on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And honestly, that critique right there is my largest critique of this video. Because as I was editing the video, I went through all, like the light versus dark, or the text versus no text, or face versus no face. So I went through all these visual elements, right? Just to see, because like you said, I went through the homepage on multiple different accounts. I went and I even selected, the new to you filter so that I would get videos that I wouldn't typically see, or thumbnails that I wouldn't typically see. But like you said, if you're showing up on someone's homepage, I mean, you may be subscribed to them, but any other thumbnail, you're going to see decent thumbnails. And so you're right. I think I do wish that I would have made that more clear, because I think at the beginning of the video I said I want to look at the best thumbnails on YouTube, but after that was all that I said about it. And I think it would have driven the point home that regardless of what visual elements you use, if you create curiosity, if you do those types of things, you can get away with tons of different types of visual elements. So I think you're right. I think it really would have driven the point of the video home. I also feel like the video's sort of segmented it into part 1, part 2. Like you'll notice, like I kind of switched locations. Other than just continuing interest, trying to keep people watching, I don't really know the total value of doing that. I also feel like my conclusion of the video doesn't really match the first half of the video very well. I think it could have. If I had framed it a little bit better.
It was relevant, but it wasn't pointed out.
Yes. And so, that would be my biggest critique. People still watched.
But it did well.
To me, it's the same thing. It worked in spite of, not necessarily because of. I think that pointing out the differences, 50% light thumbnails versus 50% dark thumbnails, or, 20% of thumbnails have text versus, 80% that don't. I think that ended up working. That kept people engaged, because I went through those pretty fast and people might have just been curious.
Right.
And so I think that's probably what kept people holding on.
I think that is so important too, is to touch on everything that as quickly as possible, or as much as you can, touch on things that people always wonder, because people don't want to leave a video thinking, okay, but you never even considered this, or you never touched on this. Even if you had considered it, they don't know that if you don't mention it. And so it is really nice to say, yes, don't worry, I did take this into the account as well. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that the critical comments on the video, there were a couple critical ones, not like super harsh, but critical, but they didn't have to do with that. They weren't really criticizing your data. Like one person was talking about how like important titles are. and how titles are underrated compared to thumbnails. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not really the point of this video, but
Right.
okay.
And I would agree. I think titles are very important.
Yeah.
I wouldn't argue that they're more important than the thumbnail, though, which I think is what their argument, or one of the
Yes.
arguments was.
I would
more important.
Right. More important. Yeah. That's a big claim. I would say underrated,
Yeah.
undervalued.
Yeah.
People don't spend enough time
Yeah.
thinking about titles compared to thumbnails. But yeah, I thought that was interesting how people didn't even criticize this thing that you and I both thought was the biggest shortcoming. And another thing that in hindsight, I think, oh yeah, no wonder this would have been the problem. Because so often when we're doing a video together, we even have a little delay because we've noticed this. We've noticed that we can do a whole outline and look at it a few days later. And most commonly what we want to change is kind of like the central point, or does this outline, does this flow, does it really make sense? Not even necessarily retention. Like we might tweak something in the intro to make it a little more snappy. Like, do we really need the sentence? Or we might tweak the thumbnail. But almost always we find that there's something with like the main point that we want to make more clear. So maybe some restructuring, take something out, adding something in, whatever. It does seem like that is usually easier to do with the space of a couple days at least. So it makes sense that that was kind of the shortcoming of this 8-hour video. You don't have enough time to get farther away from it.
Yeah. Yep. And not even a second set of eyeballs on it. Like
Right.
it was not only was it rushed, but it was just my brain trying to figure out how to make it make sense. And I'll admit, like even in the edit, by the time I got to the end or closer to the end of the edit, there were some things I just wasn't happy with the way that I said it. I thought that it might bring the wrong point across. And I even tried like editing out specific little words and still try to make it make sense. And I just couldn't. So I ended up having to leave it. There were a couple things in the video that I totally would have said differently, especially kind of the main point of the video, which ended up being like, you need to generate curiosity and that sort of thing. I also, at the end of the video, said that a lot of what makes a thumbnail work is luck. I don't like the way that came across.
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel like there's no way for them to be successful other than luck. And so when I watched that back, I was like, oh, why did I have to say it that way? Because it's not what I meant. It's what I meant is there are a lot of factors that we can't control. And so we need to do everything that we can from a design standpoint and, you know, getting curiosity. We need to do all of that so that those factors we can't control, so that we'll just have our best chance. But anyway, I just think that I emphasized the wrong part, because luck isn't necessarily the right word, because there's a lot of work that also goes into it, and skill and repetition. I also wanted to address that sometimes you make a good thumbnail and sometimes it doesn't work still. Overall, I would say I think it turned out okay. One thing that I will admit that I think I did well, which I was a little bit proud of, is that I tried to tease that end point a couple times early on in the video. Like there's this one thing that I want to talk about, but we're going to, we're going to do that at the end of the video. I tried to kind of tease people along a little bit to try and get them to continue to watch. Those types of hooks and whatever I'm not very good at. So I tried to do that. And then honestly, my biggest concern when I watched through it, and then you and Cody were going to watch through it, my biggest concern was what you guys would think about the "it's luck" message. I thought that you guys would be like, that's probably not what we want to say. At the end of the day, it wasn't really what I had hoped to emphasize. But again, like in the comments, no one really called that out. I think maybe the point got across regardless of me not saying it perfectly.
Right, which is awesome. And it's nice to see that there is that little bit of leeway.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge reason that some videos end up taking so much longer than they need to, probably for anybody's channel, is that perfectionism or that those worries creep in.
Yeah.
Then you feel like, well, it's not ready yet, because what if people think this, or what, just make the video.
Yeah. And
clarify later if you
that's
need
a very good point. And I think that that's something that we run into pretty often, is that we try and cover our bases. We're like, well, what if someone thinks this and what if someone thinks that? And so we end up like giving all these caveats and, but if you're in this situation, it's that.
Just muddies it.
It just kind of muddies the message. And at the end of the day, like some of the concerns that we had with this video, we published it, and those weren't even the things people brought up. They still brought stuff up, but people are always going to bring stuff up.
Yeah.
And we can never really accurately guess. To some extent, we might be able to, but we typically won't perfectly guess what people's criticisms will be of our video. So we might as well just publish it, speak to the audience we want to speak to, and then anyone with concerns, they can voice them and then we can address them.
Yeah. And I think that's so much of why thumbnails feel sort of like luck, because like you said, sometimes you can make a great thumbnail, but maybe your title's off.
Yeah.
Or maybe you have great thumbnail and title combination, but the topic is different than what you normally do on your channel. So it kind of throws the algorithm off. There's like so many factors. Or maybe it's a little misleading. And so people click away in the first 3 seconds more than usual. Or your energy was lower in the first 3 seconds, even if everything matched perfectly. And so you have so many factors. And then you try to put so much weight into one thing. And that is absolutely where I think people get so frustrated. And they're like, well, I made a good thumbnail, so does it even matter? And like you said, is it sitting next to a Mr. Beast video? There's just so many factors. And so even if technically it's very little luck, that's kind of the right way to look at it in some ways, is that there is an amount of luck.
Right.
Because you can't know everything. But mostly if you can get as much right as possible, you'll have better chances.
Yeah, totally. One person did comment, and I think it was the person who was talking about titles, and they said that they've gone through and have been A/B testing their titles and have seen a big improvement. And I wonder if there's something to be said about that. Like you said, I think titles are underrated in their value. We oftentimes talk about, if you think about it, kind of like a big funnel, like your thumbnail is the billboard, right? That's what people are going to see first. It will catch their eye. And a lot of times when I'm scrolling through YouTube, if something catches my eye, I immediately go to the title because I want just a little bit more context. Yeah. And so if the title, like the title can portray multiple different things related to the actual thumbnail. And so I would not be surprised if you would, in some cases, have better luck changing the title than you would just changing the thumbnail.
Yep.
Because like if your thumbnail is attention grabbing in any way, at least somewhat related to your video topic, but then with the title, just that additional context could be the thing that gets more people to click than not. So anyway, I think there's a whole other discussion to have about kind of that thumbnail title combo and the value of titles. But anyway, I think that overall big takeaway for me is just to switch up what we normally do. Sometimes maybe that's taking a little more time than what we usually take on a video. Sometimes it's like this and it's taking less time, or having one person present rather than two. We've been doing a little bit more experimenting with that. And I think whether it's working better or not, I don't know, but it's just good to stretch yourself a little bit and to learn different ways to go about it. And you might find that one just happens to work a little bit better. A lot of it is experimentation on a channel by channel basis. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome that it did 2 out of 10.
Yep. I was very happy
Definitely
to see
performed,
that.
easily met your metrics. I'm not sure if we have the retention. We'll check really quick. I'm not sure if we have the retention graph yet. Okay.
Yep. Not yet.
But you can kind of do the math by looking at the length of the video and then the average view duration, and you're above. You're definitely above. And it's 2 out of 10. I know you're above the average view percentage. So you
passed the test.
Passed the test. It was a success. And one more thing I would have liked to have seen is just more of a compelling watch next, which is probably hard because, it could have been, and if you want to know exactly how to, make your thumbnails more curiosity inducing, then watch this next. But had we talked about a video about that? Not yet. Or it could have tied back to one of our older videos, but you were short on time. We didn't really have time to talk about it. That's just one thing that we don't always do even when we have infinite time, a regular amount of time to make a video. And I wish we did that more. So that would be cool. But anyways, I think overall it was amazing. I'm really glad we did it. Easy for me to say because I didn't have to do most of the work.
Yeah. I would love to talk just briefly about the Watch Next.
Yeah.
So I actually did give some thought to the Watch Next. And I guess what I ended up realizing is we didn't really have a great video to point to. Like as far as thumbnails go, we've gone through a lot of changes on the Channel Makers channel the last few months, and our library is really small right now.
Yeah.
I guess any ideas or thoughts for anyone listening, like if you feel like you don't have something great to push people to, should you give a watch next to a video that you plan to create, or like I don't know, or just like something more generic? Which is I ended up having to go a little more generic,
right?
Just because I think this is now the only video on our channel about thumbnails.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
What about the cold plunge one? Is that still up?
Maybe. Oh, you're right. That one is up.
But that one might be confusing because if that were like, keep it really simple, which kind of goes against.
Okay, you're right.
What you said.
That one is probably actually. That one is better than the one I pointed people to.
Right.
So I did miss that one.
I wasn't even thinking about necessarily another thumbnail video. I wonder if you could have somehow said, But in addition to a great thumbnail, it's not going to matter if your intro isn't. Do we even have one on intro specifically? I don't know.
Right,
it
right.
might have been hard, but
just like pinpointing something a little more specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Or maybe that's a great time if you don't have a good video to point to. Maybe that's a great time to give a really strong call to action that has nothing to do with the watch next.
Good point.
Because then you're only giving them one thing to do.
Right.
But
yeah, no, I think that's a good alternative. And you're right. I think sometimes we think like, okay, I think I just had a very specific way I was thinking of another video to relate.
Right.
And I just didn't even think of that other thumbnail video or any other call to action.
Thought about it. You didn't miss that step completely.
Right.
And often we miss things or neglect to do them when we have the whole team working on a video for a couple weeks. So
yeah,
I still think you did amazing.
Better than 0.
A lot better than 0.
0.5 out of 5. No, and honestly, on the overall rating, the rating scale that we did on these other people's channels and then that you did on this video, I think 4 out of 5 on a lot of these is pretty generous, to be honest. I probably would have said 2.5 to 3 on most things. That's just when we look at like some of the bigger players in our industry, like some of them do such a good job.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I did as best as I could in that time allotted, so maybe there's a little bit of forgiveness there. But overall, I think that thank you for the generous score. But I think it was pretty generous. I think, of course, the editing was what it was. That's not my forte. But yeah, I think it was good for me because after you said that you went and kind of scored, I went through and did just not like an official score, but I just thought through some of the items and probably would give myself closer to a 50% on a lot of them, just because with a little more time and effort, I could have done better. If I had 8 hours to spend on the thumbnail, I could have got into Photoshop and I could have figured out a better thumbnail.
That's a key thing that people forget too, is that all the things you could have done better because you've thought about them for a second. And the people watching it don't have that to compare it to. Whatever thumbnail you might have wanted to make.
Yep.
We're not seeing that. We're seeing the one that
good point
that actually happened. So, but it's good that you're able to be hard on yourself. It would be cool if more people could be able to at least see where they could improve, But I think it's really promising that we both notice the same big things.
Yeah.
Because it would be a little nerve-wracking if we were completely different.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, are we
So
accurate?
what is it?
Yeah. So what is it?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, thank you for doing that challenge.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was incredibly
it was a crazy day.
Tiring.
Yeah.
You seemed so tired by the end.
It was so exhausting.
You just looked like you were ready to go home.
Yep.
But I think it was great for the channel. We got 2 videos out of it and learned some awesome things.
Yeah.
So.
It's always good to get out of what we typically do.
Yeah.
Break the norm a little bit. And whether the video had ended up performing how it is, or if it was a 10 out of 10, I still think some of the learning would have been there, or at least reminded me like it's good to step out of what we do normally. And I think we could have had some really good takeaways regardless of its performance. I think the performance of the video is just kind of icing on the top. But I don't think that was necessarily the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think it kind of validated that it's okay to do sometimes, which I'm honestly glad, because I would love to see a lot of people step out of their current production schedule.
In the comments, if you've ever done a video that was out of the norm, maybe a certain kind of challenge, or maybe you weren't thinking of it as a challenge, but you did things in a different way than you normally do them, whether the results were positive or negative, I would really love to hear about that. And yeah, give us ideas for more things we can try and just give each other ideas.
Yeah.
Love to hear it. So thank you for watching or listening, and we will see you next time.
See you guys.